The ancient Hebrew manuscript I have is older than the printing press, even older than the Renaissance, and yet it has survived. But what secrets does it hold, and just how rare is this amazing manuscript? Well, join me in this video as we talk about this amazing piece of history from the 14th century. It's really a beautiful item, so you want to watch the full video to see what exactly that looks like, and also enjoy a dramatized story of events that took place during the time that this particular manuscript was produced. Rome, Italy, 1395. A cold wind howled through the narrow alleys of the Eternal City, carrying with it the stench of unwashed bodies and burning tallow. In the heart of the Vatican, the grand halls of the papal palace flickered with the uneasy glow of torchlight. Shadows danced across marble columns and the air was thick with the scent of incense, meant of course to ward off illness, though it did little against the fever gripping Pope Boniface IX. In a chamber heavy with whispered prayers and the rustling of anxious clergy, the Pope lay motionless, his skin pale and slick with sweat. His breath came shallow, his lips cracked. The finest physicians in all Christendom stood around him, their faces drawn with failure. Remedies had been exhausted, blood had been let, and the holy relics had been placed beside him, and yet nothing seemed to work. Then came a mysterious knock. A Vatican guard opened the door, and a figure stepped inside, shrouded in a heavy cloak. Isaac ben Mordecai, known as Maestro Gaio, moved with quiet confidence, but his presence was an open secret, and a dangerous one. He was a Jew, a physician summoned not out of preference, but out of desperation. The air inside the chamber was suffocating, a blend of incense, sweat, and sickness. Gaio barely glanced at the skeptical Christian doctors as he knelt beside the bed. He had been in this position before, a healer in a world where men like him were blamed for plagues, for poisonings, for the very illnesses they sought to cure. Boniface's breathing was labored, his pulse weak beneath Gaio's practiced fingers. Dehydration, heat within the body warring against itself. "This is not the work of demons," he said, his voice steady. "It's the body's own humors turned against him. He does not need more bleeding, he needs warmth, strength, and a restoration of balance." The Pope's physicians exchanged glances. Theories of humors, bile, blood, and phlegm were known to them, but they had hesitated to act against tradition. But Gaio did not hesitate. "I need warm wine mixed with crushed herbs," Gaio commanded, "cinnamon, myrrh, and a touch of saffron." A scoff from one of the Christian doctors. "Warm wine? That is no cure." But the guards did not wait for debate. The order had been given. Moments later, the bitter-smelling mixture was prepared. The Pope, too weak to protest, swallowed in small sips. Now all there was left to do was wait. The chamber held its breath as the night stretched on. Hour by hour, Gaio watched, monitoring and waiting in anxious anticipation. Had he arrived too late? Would the Pope ever wake? Or would he be blamed for a death that he had not caused? As the first light of dawn spilled through the windows, the Pope stirred. His breath deepened, his fingers beginning to twitch. The fever had not vanished, but its grip had loosened. He opened his eyes, and in a voice raspy but unmistakably alive, he spoke with a dry voice simply asking for water. Gaio exhaled slowly. The worst had passed. By midday, word had spread. The Pope had survived, and with it whispers filled the Vatican corridors. A miracle, some murmured. Others warned of a Jew's sorcery. Gaio was neither fool nor hero. He had saved the most powerful man in all of Christendom, but power had no memory. Today, he was untouchable. Tomorrow, he can be accused of anything. You see, during that time, Jews were under much persecution, often accused of horrifying acts shrouded in lies and deceit. Some deemed to be a poisoner in disguise, while others a secret heretic, and the accusations would seem to never end. But he had walked this line before, and as he stepped out into the morning light, the bells of Rome tolled overhead. He passed through the streets, past men who would never know his name, past walls that would never honor him. He had saved the Pope, and yet he wondered what history would record of him. So of course it's a very interesting story with some dramatization and embellishments throughout to make it a little bit more entertaining, but it more or less holds true to what we understand about the historical events surrounding this particular character, Isaac ben Mordecai, and of course Pope Boniface IX. A really interesting story. The manuscript I have is not tied to them directly, but there is some very interesting overlaps. So of course Mordecai being a Jew, so he's directly related to the Hebrew aspect of that, which this manuscript is written in Hebrew. He lived in Italy and this manuscript was produced in Italy, and they're both around the same exact time. The events of the story took place around 1395, and this particular manuscript was produced in 1399. At least that's the date that's been given to it. But this is what the manuscript looks like here. Now this is no ordinary manuscript. This is a handwritten leaf from what's known as a Haftarah, the sacred readings of the Jewish people. And it specifically contains readings from 1st and 2nd Kings, which of course are amazing books and have a lot of really fascinating and important stories for the biblical narrative. An amazing item. I've really enjoyed having it. When I saw it for sale, I knew it was very rare, but I didn't know exactly how rare it was. I've been collecting for many years now, and as I look for these different items, it's very rare that I see one that looks like this. So of course I had to have it, and I'm very glad that I purchased this one. Now I will give a quick disclaimer that I am not a Hebrew paleographic expert, so this is not something that is my expertise. I don't know everything there is to know about this particular manuscript. I had to do a lot of research on this when I bought it and when I was preparing for this video. So I may get some things wrong. I'm open to being corrected on stuff. Just be sure to let me know in the comments, and I will definitely do a future video correcting anything or updating any new findings that I might have on this. But I do believe that what I have discovered and found out is more or less accurate for this amazing piece of history. Now, if you look at the script on here, what I was able to determine is that this is what's called semi-cursive Hebrew script. The page or the leaf here is part of a Codex, a book that was used by Jewish communities in medieval Italy. This, of course, was used for centuries. People would study this very manuscript here. They would hold it in their own hands. Someone at some point in time wrote it, and then people for hundreds of years potentially read from this very manuscript. It's really amazing to be able to hold history like that in your own hands. But here is the mystery that I want to address. How has this particular manuscript survived, and what makes this particular leaf here so rare? Well, we're going to be looking at that in a little bit more detail. So the 14th century was a dangerous time for the Jewish communities in Europe. Persecutions were happening, book burnings were taking place, and expulsions happened. And of course you have the enemy of time and deterioration, things that just happen over the course of years and decades and centuries. And so it's a miracle, and it's really amazing that this awesome piece of history has survived as long as it has. A complete Jewish Bible manuscript from this era is an extreme rarity. A while ago, Sotheby sold a beautiful codex, Codex Sassoons, from I believe the 10th century or 9th century, one of those centuries, and it sold for over $30 million, I think closer to that $40 million mark. I'll have it listed right here. You can see a little bit more about that. But an amazing testament to its rarity, just with how much that one sold for. Now this one here, of course, is just a leaf, and it's not nearly as old, being dated to the late 14th century. But most Haftarah readings were copied into books and not Torah scrolls, making this manuscript even more unusual. So a Torah scroll would look something like this. I have a scroll fragment here. It's cut out from a larger scroll, but it's really an amazing piece. So this is what it looks like. It's a pretty substantial fragment. This is from the 18th or 19th century. An amazing piece of history. This, of course, is from one of the 5 books of Moses. An amazing item. But this is very clearly a scroll. This was rolled up at some point in time. You can see the back has no text on it, and only the part that will be read from has the script on there. Whereas the manuscript I have, it doesn't necessarily have text on the backside as clear. I can't see any, at least, and maybe there was some at one point in time, but from what I can tell, it doesn't appear to be any on there. But other signs and evidences point to this being from a codex and not a scroll, which adds to the value and rarity of this piece, because like I said, most items are scrolls like this. I see a lot of them on the market. There are tons of them for sale, but this is something that you don't see very often. What's also interesting about this amazing piece is that it was used as a book binding. I talked about this in a little bit of detail in my previous video, which I would encourage you to check out, where the manuscript was recovered from a book binding. Well, this was also recovered from a book binding, and you can see it very clearly, especially on the back side here, where you have the spine was here, you got the 2 book boards, and then these edges were folded around the edges of the book board, and then the corners were cut off to, of course, make that bending much easier. And I also showed this theology book in one of my previous videos. This is an example of what a manuscript binding would look like. An amazing piece. I really enjoyed having this because it's really good visual aid for what these manuscripts would have looked like when they were recovered from these book bindings. And that's very likely why this amazing piece of history survived all of those centuries, because of its being used as a book binding. But we have to ask the question now is, what is this worth? How valuable is this item? Well, medieval Hebrew manuscripts are some of the rarest books in the world. They're actually very difficult to come by. All of the items that I have, or at least a lot of the manuscripts I have in my collection, are written in Latin. Even the earlier printed books are printed in Latin. And so having a Hebrew one is exceptionally rare, especially from that 14th century dating. Similar manuscript leaves like this one have sold for thousands, sometimes even tens of thousands of dollars, of course depending on their condition, content, and the historical significance. And so this being a 14th century Jewish Haftarah book written by hand before the invention of the printing press makes it incredibly rare. If it has unique textual variants, it could be even more valuable. Now, I'm not necessarily an expert on Hebrew. I have taken some Hebrew classes in my seminary, but this one here is very difficult to read and is not something that I'm super skilled at. So looking at those variants would be really difficult for me, although it's something that I would love to do some more research on. So of course, if you want to learn more about this manuscript, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on videos like this one. You can also check out my other long form videos where I cover a wide range of different Bible items and really interesting stuff that takes place there. So be sure to check those out. Also stick around for those close-up shots. I know I try to go through these things pretty quickly, but there's some really cool details you can catch looking at the manuscript in more detail, and then again doing new videos on that in the future. I appreciate you guys watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.